Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. I have done a huge geopolitical live stream update today, and it is very late at night UK time, and there's an awful lot more still to talk about, so apologies, but more content concerning the meeting in London between Starmer, Merz, Macron and Zelensky, and then Zelensky going to Europe for further meetings, and an awful lot of what the Americans have said, and just a summary of where we are on another exceptionally busy day concerning the war in Ukraine. If you haven't already done so, please remember to like, subscribe and share. Keep yourselves in the loop and help out the channel. So thank you very much for those who have already done so. Let's get into the details of what has been going on. We are going to start with the extraordinary repost here of the American president, who takes a New York Post article. New York Post is generally very favorable of Ukraine, but I guess probably still MAGA enough to be anti-Europe and pro-Trump. They release an article that Trump then reposts on his Truth Social platform, saying, quote, "Impotent Europeans can only fume as Trump rightly sidelines them from the Ukraine deal." So Donald Trump tonight has essentially announced, one, that the European leaders are impotent, and two, that they should be sidelined from peace negotiations. That is an extraordinary position for the American president to be advocating in public. That is how destructive this man is, and how insane a position we are in, which is not favoring Ukraine, favoring Russia very publicly, and putting Zelensky under pressure. We've already had him kneeling at Zelensky over the last couple of days. So this is another absolutely extraordinary position for Donald Trump to advocate, really dissing the Europeans at the moment. Absolutely unbelievable. I can't believe the American president would be as bold as to be so controversial and so abrasive. Now we have Zelensky, US pushes Zelensky for a swift yes on a peace plan, say Ukrainian officials. This is Axios reporting that US is pressuring Zelensky to agree to territorial concessions. Trump's advisors apparently wanted to get a clear yes from Zelensky when discussing the plan with him. Quote, "There was a feeling that the US tried in various ways to convince us of Russia's desire to seize all of Donbas, and that the Americans wanted Zelensky to accept all of this in a phone conversation," the Ukrainian official said. Also, according to the Ukrainian official, the US offer worsened for Kiev after Witkoff and Kushner held a 5-hour meeting with Putin on December the 2nd. Witkoff and Kushner went all the way to Moscow to renegotiate the deal that the Ukrainians and Americans had come up with, and they came back with a worse deal. So, you know, the US offer worsened as they spoke to Putin and were convinced by Putin. Now, we have seen Zelensky go and get solace in Europe, going to London today, have warm hugs with Keir Starmer on Downing Street. Really, I think, quite positive pictures coming out of this, at least with the Europeans standing by Zelensky. But the claim from the American leaders that these are impotent European leaders who have effectively been sidelined. Keir Starmer said that the Ukrainian issue is Ukraine's business, and that today's talks are a critical stage in a fight for peace. Zelensky added today is very important. Of course, it's over and done with now. Unity between Europe, Ukraine, and the US. Macron stressed the Russian economy is starting to suffer, especially after our latest sanctions. We're going to look at him speak actually in a second where he says this, but I think that is super important. We're going to return to that in a second. Merz said he was skeptical about some of the details in the documents coming from the US, but added that this was why the leaders had gathered today. Quote, "This could be a decisive moment for all of us, so we are trying to continue to support Ukraine. The fate of the country, Ukraine, is the fate of Europe." Okay, so pretty big rhetoric from these leaders. Let's now listen to Macron and Merz as they speak in London with Zelensky and Starmer there too.
This discussion, and thank you, Vladimir, to be with us together with Friedrich. I think we all support Ukraine, and we all support peace and peace negotiations to have a sustainable, a robust peace. And I think we have a lot of cards in our hands.
Okay, so Macron is talking about having cards in our hands, which is a direct contradiction of what Trump has said. The European leaders, essentially, their job is to navigate a very, very tricky path here, where they want to be strong in defending Ukraine, but they also don't want to properly piss off Donald Trump. But I don't know how you can go about doing this without there being ruckus between the entities here. That is so difficult. Like many of us just want Macron, Starmer, and Merz to just come out and say, "Screw you, Trump. We're going to support Ukraine," etc., etc., etc. But of course, as I've said many a time, that will send Trump into the arms of Putin more formally. But it's very clear that the US has no interest in having Ukraine do well out of these deals. They don't care one iota. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump, they couldn't give a damn about Ukraine. Honestly, they don't give a damn. They just don't care. And that's where we're at. And they want Ukraine to give up the Donbas so that you can have a quick peace, and then Trump wheels out the old claim to, deserving a Nobel Peace Prize. And then they can all start going to make lots of money out of Russia and extorting Ukraine with minerals, and so on and so forth. So that's, I think, where the Americans are at. They don't care for a just, peaceful Ukraine, not at all. So that's left for the Europeans to try and argue for. But essentially, the Europeans and Ukraine are now arguing against Russia and the United States. If a peace happens here, and it forces Ukraine into a much worse position than they should be accepting, then Donald Trump be damned. I don't believe in hell, but be damned to hell. That's how strongly I believe that man and his team of absolute douchebags are operating at the moment. Honestly, it makes me incandescent with rage.
The financing and the furniture of equipment and training programs to Ukraine, the fact that Ukraine is resisting in this war, and the fact that the Russian economy is starting to suffer, especially after our latest sanctions and the US sanctions.
That is super important. Right. Emmanuel Macron has in public stated that the Russian economy is in trouble. And I don't think we've heard big talkers stipulate this nearly enough. This is a game of pressure cooker chicken, like I keep saying, where one side's lid will blow. Whose will it be? Well, the Russians, the biggest pressure for them is their economic situation. Now, I think the Bild German newspaper today, I don't know who they were referencing, but the idea is that the Russians can probably hold on for 12 to 18 months more in fighting, financially speaking, but at what cost, to their society. So it is hurting. Of course, it's hurting Ukraine as well. So there's a lot to be said for discussions about reparations, loans, and whatnot. But Macron talking about the weakness of the Russian economy here, I think, is significant.
And now I think the main issue is a convergence between our common positions, Europeans and Ukrainians, and the US to finalize these peace negotiations.
How fascinating. They're not talking about the convergence of the positions between the Russians and the Ukrainians. They're talking about the convergence of positions where the Europeans and the Americans have to agree on what's going on here. The Americans are effectively now the Russians by proxy in terms of these negotiations. It's absolutely astonishing.
Re-engage a new phase in the best possible conditions for Ukraine, for the Europeans, and for our collective security. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, for having us here in 10 Downing Street in London today. I highly appreciate that we are having the opportunity to see you, Volodymyr, together with Emmanuel, and talking about the upcoming days, because this could be a decisive time for all of us. So we are trying to continue our support for Ukraine, as you know. On the other hand, we are seeing these talks and negotiations in Moscow and in the US. I'm looking forward to hear from you what the outcome of these talks might be. And we are still and remain strongly behind Ukraine and giving support to your country, because we all know that this the destiny of this country is the destiny of Europe. So that's the reason why we are here, trying to figure out what we can do. And nobody should doubt on our support for Ukraine. And this is what we are firmly standing behind, and the outcome is open. I'm skeptical about some of the details which we are seeing in the documents coming from the US side, but we have to talk.
We are skeptical of some of the details coming from the documents coming from the US side. Saying it pretty much there that the US is selling you down the river. We are not happy, essentially, with what is coming from the US. That's essentially how you translate that.
That's why we are here. Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you all.
Okay, so that's two of the leaders there. Now, just on the economic position of Russia, like I say, it's really good to have people discuss explicitly how weak Russia is. Here we have a piece in The Guardian by Simon Tisdall. Putin should have accepted Trump's deal. Now Russia's collapsing economy could lead to his downfall. In order for Russia to hold on, Putin had to accept Trump's deal, but now Russia's economic collapse could lead to the fall of power. An opinion piece in The Guardian, a version of the deal was written for the Kremlin that rewarded Russia's aggression by handing it pieces of Ukrainian territory. But Putin, due to his neo-imperial ambitions, said no. He believes that he can get even more by continuing to fight. He convinced Trump that Russia's victory was inevitable. Continuing the war has catastrophic consequences for the Russian economy, which is supposedly showing growth. The Kremlin's oil and gas revenues have fallen by 27%. Russia is facing a recession with inflation at 8%. And of course, in reality, it's far higher than that. And a key rate above 16%. The budget's deficit is growing. Half of the liquid sovereign fund has been squandered, and the prices of strategic goods have increased. Now, then we go to this. Stephen Swinford said, breaking: Britain and the EU are getting closer to releasing £200 billion worth of frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine's reconstruction. The announcement could come within days. So this has been happening in the background by all accounts, but I'd like to see more formal details on this. Downing Street says that there was positive progress made to use and mobilize Russian sovereign assets to support Ukraine's reconstruction during those talks with Macron, Merz, and Zelensky, as well as the meeting in number 10. There was a call with the leaders of the European Commission, the EU Council, Finland, Norway, Italy, Denmark, Poland, Sweden, the Netherlands, and senior representatives from Turkey. The leaders all agreed that now it is a critical moment, then that we must continue to ramp up support to Ukraine and economic pressure on Putin to bring an end to the barbaric war. However, essentially, this is Europe and others, obviously Ukraine, Canada, Australia, I presume too, against the United States and Russia. Russia is advocating on behalf of the US is advocating on behalf of Russia. Now, no reports here. It says during Zelensky's visit to Brussels. So then Zelensky went to Brussels after meeting in London. Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, met with the Belgian Defence and Trade Minister Theo Franken to discuss F-16 deliveries, very important, the Pearl program, so buying off the US, support for Ukraine's defence industry and energy security. Sybiha also called for tougher sanctions and the use of frozen Russian assets. And you can bet your bottom dollar that last bit, frozen Russian assets, would have been solidly on the agenda to talk about in Belgium. And then in Brussels, Zelensky met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, European Council President Antonio Costa, and the EU Commission head Ursula von der Leyen. He briefed them on diplomatic efforts and ongoing talks with the US on peace, security guarantees, resilience, and coordination on Pearl and the reparations loan. But remember, all the while, Donald Trump, behind everyone's back, or really in front of their faces, says these are impotent Europeans who can only fume as Trump rightly sidelines them from the Ukraine deal. So the question is, are they going to be sidelined? Is that what's happening, or is Zelensky going to have to formally rely on Europe much more robustly? But then, of course, that will just act as a catalyst, possibly, to cause the US to diverge from Europe and fall into the arms of the Kremlin. Ursula von der Leyen said, this afternoon we had a meeting with the coalition of willing. I updated Zelensky and leaders present on two key priorities: support for Ukraine and increasing European defence preparedness. we all know what is at stake, and we do not have any more time to lose. Securing financial support will help ensure the survival of Ukraine and its crucial act of European defense. Russia's brutal war sought to divide us, but it has achieved the opposite. Our ties are stronger than ever. We are not only bound by defense interests, but by our common values. And this is how we will proceed, united in supporting Ukraine and in defending Europe. So that's Ursula von der Leyen. Then you've had the German foreign minister here, German foreign policy and security expert and member of the German parliament. Sorry, it's not their foreign minister, that's Waderfull. This is Rhetoric, a really strong supporter of Ukraine, issued another stark warning, this time regarding the latest US national security strategy document. This was his statement. So, big German politician. The national security strategy of the Trump administration is here. Anyone who reads the document must understand the United States has not only bid farewell to its role as a world policeman, but the upheavals run much deeper. I don't actually think that the United States has ever really been that. But anyway, I've discussed that before. The United States is no longer interested in Europe. Even more, this administration no longer views Europe and specifically the EU as a partner, but rather in large part as a strategic ballast, as an economic adversary, and as a civilization in decline. For Trump, the states over institutions, the EU as a force for order, is seen as hostile construct that stands in the way of the US interests. And in the economic worldview of this administration, we are not an ally, but a competitor that must be made to pay up. Trump thinks transactionally and with a deal-making mentality that contradicts Europe's institutionalized and rules-based approach. The military music is playing exclusively in the Indo-Pacific. The resources we need for protection, air defenses, reconnaissance are heading to Guam and Taiwan to contain China. Nothing will be left for us unless we build it ourselves. The talk of Europe's civilizational decline in the national security strategy is a slap in the face. They no longer entrust us with the future. Anyone who writes about partners in this way won't defend them when it really counts. What does that mean? The era of the security guarantee is over, i.e. NATO Article 5. Washington now treats us more like the annoying client state that's supposed to pay tribute, or like an economic rival that must be kept in check. I say this as a committed transatlanticist, because the United States sees us this way. We must finally stop being supplicants. We should stop blindly hoping and instead build up our own capabilities with maximum efficiency and develop smart power that makes us more independent and resilient. Because the United States is pulling back, we must support Ukraine more strongly. If Ukraine fails, Russia will be at our border and Washington won't come to save us. Integrating Ukraine now as part of the European defense and supporting it in such a way that it can push Russia back is part of this necessary efficiency. It will only cost us half of what Russian success would. So that's a really strongly worded statement there from Kiesewetter. Now, here we have another article. Here it is, just trying to work out, is this from Axios, Bloomberg? Anyway, what the US wants from Ukraine, leave Donbas one way or another. The US wants, says no reports. The US is pressuring Ukraine to cede all of Donbas as part of a peace deal, according to a senior European official. Kyiv insists on freezing the war along current lines, still holding 30% of Donbas. Zelensky warns such a concession would only fuel future Russian aggression, as we already know. Now, Zelensky said a number of other things. Trump has his own vision for ending the war, which differs from Ukraine's, which, yeah, we definitely know this, but it's interesting to hear it from the horse's mouth. The Americans will continue to supply weapons to Ukraine. They make money from it, and it suits their current policies, Zelensky says. Exchanging Ukrainian territories for security guarantees is not being considered. There's this clear red line. Zelensky says Ukraine has no right under the Constitution, international and moral law to cede those territories. As well, he says things aren't easy on the front lines right now, but there's no need to be pessimistic about territories the enemy hasn't yet captured. That doesn't mean they will. And there was the larger comment that this one was taken from. Ukraine has no right under the Constitution, international moral law to cede territories. I should have actually got the larger comment there, because it was really, really significant. It's stating very clearly that Ukraine simply cannot give those territories up. And yet that's essentially the red line that not just Russia have drawn, but it seems like the United States have drawn that red line. Then Zelensky had some sort of closed door, I think, press conferences, or a press conference with, in this case, a Ukrainian journalist from Babel, I think. Katerina Lisunova here says, breaking, Zelensky at a closed press conference with Ukrainian journalist Babel. Katerina Koberniak said, are we considering giving up any territory? Zelensky said, quote, we have no, so I think this is possibly where that's coming from, but I thought he also said that elsewhere, but maybe it is from this one. Yeah, no, it is from this comment. So Zelensky said in full, quote, we have no legal rights under the Ukrainian law, our constitution, or international law, and frankly, no moral right either. Of course, Russia keeps insisting that we surrender territories. We absolutely do not want to give anything up. That's what we're fighting for. And you know that perfectly well. Today, the Americans are looking for a compromise, I'll be honest. Yeah, I mean, this comment below pretty much sums it up. Sorry for my American friends, but what a bastard the USA has become. And we all know why. Trump's mental decline is at the center. The kleptocrats around him all trilling Russia's corrupt melodies. It's a scandal. Americans should be feeling ashamed. Well, I wonder how history will look on these days. But that's a really robust statement there from Zelensky. And it is clear that you know, not only is it absolutely insane that you would make Ukraine give up land that Russia has failed to conquer. Not only is that just absolutely outrageous, but it just shows in order to demand that of Ukraine, you must really be advocating for Russia. And then when you understand that actually Donald Trump Jr. is in Doha spouting off anti-Ukrainian propaganda, you understanding where this is all kind of coming from. There's a whole ideology surrounding Trump from his acolytes and associates and people adjacent to the administration. It is just an uphill battle for the Ukrainians. So here, Guardian article says, US may end support for Ukraine war effort, says Donald Trump Jr. The elder son of Donald Trump makes speculative comments during a tirade against Zelensky and the EU. It's just, they've gone to war, these people, with not, unfortunately, with Russia, no, and not even with China, as we're going to see, but no, with Ukraine and with the EU, with their allies. They've turned code. This is Don Trump Jr.
For years, again, it was the same thing as the last answer, which is, well, we want to attack Russia. We want to do this. Well, when it comes to actually writing a check ourselves, no, the U.S. is going to do it. The American public doesn't have an appetite for that. There was no appetite for that, but that didn't stop a Republican Party from saying it's the #1 issue. It's not, and we actually have to listen to the will of those people. So we want peace. We want to stop the death, but I even saw that yesterday where, you know, on this very stage, what was the idea for Europe, who is on the border of Ukraine, who has much more at stake if this happens? Well, our plan is to win economically when pressed on the issue. How are you going to do that? Well, we're just going to wait for Russia to go bankrupt. That's not a plan. America has set a precedent for decades.
I mean, it literally is a plan, though. I mean, and it could have been achieved already had the United States hit Russia with those sanctions on January the 21st. I mean, like, this annoys me because that demands some pushback. It is an absolute plan. Russia has to collapse economically for them to collapse militarily. You're not going to defeat them militarily. I mean, this is a plan I've been talking about all along. It just requires much more unity, which you are not giving. So I would absolutely take him to task over this.
That they'll just write the check. But if the will of the people...
We're not really demanding a check, actually. I am demanding, and I've said this plenty of times, that the US Treasury Department actually does some real heavy lifting here, but it's not massively costly. In fact, the US benefits because they get to sell their LNG instead. In fact, you know why Lukoil and Rosneft were sanctioned? Well, it turns out the US is picking up, which country is it that we'll find out today? In Iraq, that an American entity is now picking up the Lukoil assets in Iraq. So the US gains from those sanctions. The US is selling LNG on the back of those sanctions. Now, I'm not complaining too much, actually, because I'd rather the US makes money than Russia makes money, right? But Donald Trump Jr.'s position here is absolutely outrageous. or his position, his claims, his denigration of the EU and denigration of a plan to destroy Russia's economy. Of course, you've got to destroy their economy. That's how you win wars.
People isn't there. Everyone needs to step up. Everyone has to do their share. And that includes what's happening here in the Middle East. If we do that collectively, we can get to an answer. But if we default to the old ways of America's just going to be the big idiot with a checkbook, that's not going to work. That's not going to happen. And you saw what happened. When my father starts threatening they're going to pull out, we're not going to do this anymore because he's listening to the people that elected him to office.
No, absolutely not. It turns out the American people now, as according to latest polls, overwhelmingly support more aid to Ukraine. So like Donald Trump Jr. is just full of hot air.
The whole world, this is outrageous. It's not outrageous. It's common sense. For years.
If I could nip over to Doha now and give him a punch on the nose, I would. And then we have Whitaker here. So Matthew Whitaker, who is the ambassador, US ambassador to NATO, has been actually very supportive of Ukraine recently, but he's even changed his tune in accordance with a kind of a Trumpian approach to Ukraine and Russia.
The United States is the peacemaker here. President Trump is the peacemaker in chief. And, we are not spending any more money in the war in Ukraine. We are selling weapons that are to our European and Canadian allies that are buying them and supplying them to Ukraine or keeping them for themselves. But ultimately, the United States is no longer just shipping unlimited money and material to Ukraine in hopes that they can defend themselves. We are serious. We're clear-eyed. We know that peace is the only solution to this dispute and this war. And so President Trump is the only one, as the peacemaker in chief, to be able to bring both sides to end this.
But all the pressure is on Ukraine. All the pressure is on Ukraine. Russia, tell me now, somebody out there, tell me now what pressure other than the Lukoil Rosneft sanctions the US has put on Russia, but actually tell me what concessions the Russians have made that the US has forced. Tumbleweed. Okay, now we have and this was a pretty disastrous press conference, by the way. I mean, the way he treated, is it Rachel Scott from ABC? Absolutely outrageous again. But anyway, this is Trump spouting his normal stuff.
I want to see people stop from being killed. We don't, as you know, Joe Biden gave them $350 billion.
No, he didn't. Stop repeating that. It's nonsense. Shut up.
And I gave him nothing. I did give him javelins at the beginning and knocked out a hell of a lot of.
No, you didn't. I've done a whole video on this. And if there's anyone out there that's watching this video that thinks Donald Trump gave them javelins, you don't know what you're talking about. Donald Trump tried to stop them getting javelins. Do you know who gave them the javelins? Congress. That was not Trump's deal. That was John McCain and Congress voting to move towards more lethal aid to Ukraine. Then when Congress voted that through, Donald Trump stopped it because he wanted dirt on Biden. And that was why he was impeached. Donald Trump did not get javelins to Ukraine, other than when they eventually got through to Ukraine because of all the impeachment controversy. But my goodness, he fought not for Ukraine to receive javelins. I did a whole video on that. You can go and check it, and I've got the receipts.
Attacks, and Obama gave sheets. Remember, Obama gave sheets and I gave javelins. But I want to see people stop.
Just so irritating to just hear these regurgitated and recycled time and time again. Now, Trump said in the same press conference, a lot of people, well, I don't know what you call those things, gaggles. A lot of people are dying, and I want it to stop. Last month, 27,000 soldiers died, mostly soldiers, a few more because a missile fell in the center of Kiev or somewhere else, which is a terrible thing, but mostly soldiers. And what we're doing is spending time for humanitarian reasons. Just okay. So essentially, that's where we're at. We are at this situation whereby Europe is being pitted with Ukraine against the US, and the US is siding with Russia. Now, the only hope at the moment, because if Europe, like I keep saying, tells the US to go and do one, the US will more formally switch sides and then start lifting sanctions and helping out Russia more formally. So it's a really difficult path that these guys have to travel. So the hope then is that there's enough pushback within the political landscape of and the political machine of the United States to kind of rein in Trump's worst excesses here and the people around him. And maybe Congress can do something. So the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, the funding for the budget for the DoD and for the Pentagon, is looking to tie the US much more closely to Europe and to helping Ukraine, whereas the national security strategy by the Trump administration looks to go in the other direction. This both isolationist on the one hand and imperialist on another hand. So it's a bit of a kind of a contradiction in terms there. But so the hope would be there's enough pressure that mounts from within domestically in the United States. So I'm just going to finish this video with just a soupçon of what is going on in the United States that indicates that there's a bit of trouble brewing for Donald Trump at the moment. The first thing to note is he's at the lowest polling rates and they keep going down. He's like at historic lows, one of the lowest of any in the history of presidents as far as I am aware. Like, I think he's just a snip above Nixon in 1973, I think it was. He is in trouble. And in fact, it's looking like, is it tonight there's going to be, or it's taking place at the moment, there's a mayoral election taking place in Miami, and they are looking at electing the first Democratic mayor in 30 years there. 20 Republicans are on the cards to retire in the run up to the November midterm elections. Things are looking electorally really dire for the Republicans at the moment, and there's some fighting going on, which we'll come to. But just before we get there, let's look at this. So Donald Trump came out with a massive torrent tonight, basically saying, I've informed President Xi of China that the United States will allow NVIDIA to ship its H200 products to approved customers in China and other countries under conditions that allow for continued strong national security. President Xi responded positively. 25% will be paid to the United States of America, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Many people are reading what he said tonight as a capitulation to China. So not only is the US appeasing Russia, they appear to be appeasing China. Shashank Joshi says this is an extraordinary abdication of tech competition. Rush Doshi says this is a big deal, essentially a reversal of the US export control policy on advanced chips, possibly decisive in the AI race. Compute is our main advantage. China has more power, engineers, and the entire edge layer. So by giving this up, we increase the odds that the world runs on Chinese AI. Just put that into the context of what we're seeing with Ukraine and Russia, and the US just seems to be very strong rhetorically. Like often, like Trump will sound off against actually allies, but when it comes to adversaries, he's a poodle. He's pathetic. Sorry, that's doing a disservice to poodles. Then we hear today that another inflation report has been cancelled. This only happens really with dictatorships and autocratic regimes where they cancel very uncomfortable data from being released. So they cancelled inflation reports previously, as far as I understand, and they've cancelled another one today. They've cancelled recent job reports and GDP reports. But, you know, sure, everything's fine. Absolutely incredible. And we hear today that he's now giving the farmers, because he put tariffs on, cost farmers their livelihoods almost, and in many times probably has. Tariffs are a tax on the American consumer at somewhere along, you know, consumer, wholesaler, distributor, manufacturer, whoever it is, importer. You are taxing the American electorate with tariffs. And he's realized that's so controversial that he's now giving and that's what that press gag was about, announcing a $12 billion bailout for the farmers. Why do they need that bailout? Because Trump put on a tariff. So, as Adam Cochran says, Trump's tariffs hit their sales. Trump cancelling the USAID food program, buying program. Trump's cancelling the US food pantry funding. Trump's China trade war with in soybean season. Classic Trump, screw up, payouts, claim victory. So, yeah, a $12 billion bailout for the farmers, which is what he did in Trump 1.0, if you remember. Then there's all sorts of other stuff going on in MAGA world. There's a bit of a dust up in the changing room, in the back rooms here. You've had Marjorie Taylor Greene that we know about. We'll talk about her in a second. You've got Tucker Carlson coming out. You've got podcasters like Joe Rogan and Theo Von, like all of these people starting to sound off about the Trump regime in a way that shows that there is trouble. Stuff like this. So if you know Benny Johnson, he's one of these influencers who's now, I think, press accredited. He was really big at the Charlie Kirk funeral thing, commemorative event. He has been all over TV and the internet. He is a favorite of the Trump administration. But I reported to you sometime before that, and I don't care for the details of what he gets up to in his private life. I really couldn't give a monkey's, but it's the hypocrisy of the American Christian right here, and how this will play with the Republicans who love him for being this clean-cut family man. Well, there were rumors previously, and I showed you some of the stuff that's being said by people who had been involved with him. There are many rumors that he has been involved with other men. And Milo Yiannopoulos, if you don't know Milo Yiannopoulos, highly controversial, turned to Catholicism recently and has eschewed his kind of previous life as a very out gay right-winger. So top MAGA insider Milo Yiannopoulos says he has proof that Benny Johnson is gay and possibly even molested underage boys. Add Benny Johnson to the long list of closeted MAGA freaks and holier than thou fake Christian hypocrites. Now, just to give you the full context of this, Milo Yiannopoulos was talking to George Santos on a podcast, and he went off on one and just said, and George Santos was saying, man, you're going to get sued. And Milo Yiannopoulos is like, I ain't going to get sued. I have all the receipts. Bring it on. And he's now gone to town online here to say, bring it on. Dear free speech warrior Benny, dear Kate, the wife, a few notes for your consideration. I know more about defamation than any lawyer you will hire. Benny is a public figure. Now, I'm talking about Benny Johnson because he's also anti-Ukraine, pro-Russia. He is one of the influencers that took money from Tenet Media, that took money from Russia, and he was getting paid just like Tim Pool and others. So this guy sucks. Benny Johnson. Benny is a public figure. Malice is a non-starter. I have receipts, and the truth is a total defense against any claim of defamation or libel. Do you want to lose a defamation case to Milo Yiannopoulos, of all people, about whether or not you are gay? Do you want to even fight one? The people who have poured money into making you a big deal are about to lose their entire investment. And he goes off on one because Benny Johnson replied to him, I'm duty bound to take action to protect my family against those who maliciously defame and attack us. More to come on that soon. Pray for healing for some really sick and delusional, blah, blah, blah. Milo Yiannopoulos was on that podcast saying, I was speaking to his wife, crying downstairs in a hotel room as he was upstairs doing, in the hotel lobby, as he was upstairs doing, you know what. And anyway, the point of saying this, because you think this isn't the sort of place, my channel for salacious kind of rumor and whatnot. But essentially, what we are seeing are elements of the Trumpian Republican world start to eat itself. You've had people attack Mike Johnson vociferously recently, not least Marjorie Taylor Greene. We also hear today that an investigation by ProPublica, who do excellent work, ProPublica have said that, I don't know if you're aware, but basically Donald Trump is trying to sue or try to bring a court case against Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who did him for all sorts of stuff in New York and cooking the books and whatnot with regard to tax. So then as soon as he got into power, he used the Department of Justice and weaponized it against Letitia James and said, you've done this funky thing that's basically illegal to do with mortgages, second houses and whatnot. It turns out the ProPublica's done some investigation and Donald Trump's done exactly the same thing back in, I think, 1993. Oh dear, Trump. So the Trump administration has been accusing political enemies of mortgage fraud for claiming more than one primary residence. Records show President Trump himself did the same thing. So again, stuff like this is just eating away at the Trump administration and their integrity as if they had any left. And of course, then you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene with her appearance on 60 Minutes last night, saying that Republicans laugh about Donald Trump behind his back and then kiss his ass when he gets elected, but saying that, you know, he sent me a really nasty message and now there's a massive fight. In fact, Donald Trump has today, I don't know if it's here today, I think wrote a massive tirade against Marjorie Taylor Greene, or Marjorie Traitor Brown as he calls her, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is fighting back. I am America first, she says here in this post. Thank you for your attention to this matter, MTG. And she puts a side by side with Donald Trump taking $230 million from AIPAC, which is the Israeli lobbying group. And she says, I have taken $0 from AIPAC. There is a fight looming. It's not looming, it's taking place right now. And then Tucker Carlson is also sounding off against MAGA. You've got all sorts of infighting, which I find fascinating. Here is that tirade. Actually, here it is. Marjorie Traitor Brown. So with reference to the 60 Minutes interview, he's going at her. I mean, I'm not going to read it to you, but my goodness, he goes at Marjorie Taylor Greene there. And Mehdi Hassan says, if you took Trump's name off this statement and showed it to any Republican in the country, they would say this is a statement from a deranged, unhinged, megalomaniacal individual. You wouldn't hire this person for any job on earth. So Trump demands an apology from CBS or else, says this is 60 Minutes, the only reason Marjorie Traitor Brown, Greene turns brown under stress, went bad is that she was jilted by the President of the United States. Certainly not the first time she has been jilted, so on and so forth, yada, yada, yada. So what's all this got to do with Ukraine? Well, like, for me, I'm wondering whether the only hope for Ukraine is that the Trump administration, that now seems so hell-bent on appeasing Russia, gets mired in controversy and starts eating itself. And you start seeing a real pushback from the electorate in special election after special election, or you know, certain mayoral races or whatever they are. If the Miami race goes to the Democrats tonight, you've got the Tennessee special election, 7th district, I think, there, where it went 13 points to the Democrats, but that wasn't as much as some of the special elections recently, but it was treated as a midterm election because it had the same turnout. So the Republicans were so worried that they applied $3 million into the Tennessee random race, and they managed to claw it back. The polls just before were 2 points between the two, and then it moved to 8.9 in the end, which is a 13-point swing. But if that had the same turnout as it did as a midterm election, it was effectively a midterm election, then that can give you an indication that certainly on that, if you extrapolate it, then there will be a 13-point swing in a midterm election to the Democrats. And if that's the case, they win the midterms handsomely, at least in the House of Representatives. So again, the reason why I say all of this is because it gives you an indication that Trump has got an awful lot to deal with back at home. In fact, he was caught on a hot mic incident today, saying that the Democrats are really stalling me. I can't get anyone appointed, and then it runs out, blah, blah, blah. You have, was it one of his, it wasn't Lindsay Halligan, it was the other one, Alina Harbour, is now stepped back from one of the attorney general positions that she had incorrectly taken or whatever. You know, essentially things are going wrong for the Trump administration in lots of different ways at the moment. And that could be a weakness that pulls a rug out from under him. And that might mean that he's unable to push through so harshly an appeasement agenda onto Ukraine. So Ukraine have to give up some of their territory because he's got other things to worry about, or you get such pushback from Democrats and Republicans alike in the in Congress. And you know, Chris Murphy, the Connecticut senator, today coming out had a 3-minute video where he went to town on what Trump is doing with regard to supporting Russia and being against Ukraine. Yeah, so my hope is that all of this other stuff starts to really cause fault lines to go right across the Trump administration, and we get a bit of sense back into American politics. And Congress really needs to be doing more. But of course, with the unitary executive theory and the attempt of, and actually there's some Supreme Court rulings that are going to be very important concerning that. You are going to you are seeing the Trump administration try to focus all the power into the executive, into the White House, and take it away from Congress. So we need Congress to, you know, wrest back some power and assert some democratic rights back into the processes in American politics. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.